This is your city. This is your city wants to know. We want to know the background, the heartbeat of what makes up our beautiful cities. We dig into the backstories, from the struggles to the successes of our local entrepreneurs, small business owners, artists, not-for-profit organizations, and the many, many people who make up the intricate tapestry of our communities. Real people, real stories, by you and for you. But wait, that's not it. I love giving my opinion. Just ask anyone who knows me. We can't get enough of the honest, gritty feedback of places that we spend our hard-earned money. I'll give you the good, the bad, and the ugly of the places I eat, sleep, and visit. Disclaimer, my opinion only. All right, so come on, let's get to it. Hey everyone, Kim here. Thank you for tuning in. This is part 2 of the interview with Nigel Beckles, specialist in abusive relationships, co-founder of Reflections on Abusive Relationships. If you didn't tune in last week for part 1, go do it. He's got a lot to offer. He's an expert on abusive relationships and how to avoid those relationship mistakes, which we've all done. So this is part 2, Nigel Beckles.
Psychologists, psychiatrists, etc. And there's quite a few other really good websites you can get good information from.
Well, you are a tool in the sense that sometimes we just don't know. You don't know if you don't know, right? You don't know sometimes that you're in these abusive relationships because it becomes, you ever hear of the boiling frog syndrome?
Oh, that's my favorite analogy. Oh, yes.
So that's sort of like that. You just find yourself in those relationships sometimes. And so that you are such a strong advocate and that you're continuously growing and learning so that you can help others. Because if you stay stagnant, people's situations are always evolving and are so different. If you stay stagnant, you can't be that strong force of an advocate without growing and learning. So I'm thankful for you because you've helped many people. I've listened to a lot of your stuff and your interviews, and I've listened to you a lot of the times, and you really are in need. I'm not trying to like puff you up here, Nigel. I'm just saying what you do is necessary and you take it serious, and I'm just grateful for that. So, you have been there for many, many people. But I have a really tricky question for you right now. So you help us, you tell us how to avoid these relationships, you tell us how to get healthy boundaries, how to develop more self-confidence. What if we find it, what if we're the problem? How do we find that out? How do we deal with that if we're the unhealthy partner?
Well, I would say, in terms of being single, that is one of your goals, or should be, in terms of unpacking any issues that you may have. Because if you've been through 2 or 3 failed relationships or more, you've eventually got to get to the stage where you say, well, who is the common denominator in those experiences? And it's obviously it's you or it's me. So therefore you have to then be honest with yourself. I mean, I'm not sure what happens in Canada. I know in America, they're very big on therapy and therapists, which I'm a big advocate for, because I am a certified relationship coach, but coaching is about setting goals for the future. A therapist should be there to help you unpack issues from the past, i.e. your emotional baggage of whatever type it may be. So it's really a question of being honest with yourself. But as I said earlier, many people don't want to do the self-reflection. They don't want to do that inner work. And it can be tough work. Don't get me wrong. It's not easy. I've had to do quite a lot of work for myself, on myself. It's not easy, but it is necessary. Because otherwise, it's quite likely you're going to go through the same type of relationship patterns over and over again, and nothing is going to, nothing is going to improve. Now, it's not to say that some people have this idea that, if you're not in a relationship, you're not a whole person, as it were.
Oh, no.
But at the end of the day, you've got to get to the point where, this kind of attitude of, well, my other half or my better half suggests that you're only 50% of a person. Well, you really need to be like, 80, 90% of a person before you even consider getting into a relationship. Because otherwise you're just going to repeat the same pattern. And the other thing I would say, whether consciously or unconsciously, a lot of people go into relationships for unpaid therapy because they haven't worked out their stuff. They haven't worked it out. So they're expecting someone else to fix them. And it doesn't work like that.
This is good stuff. Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm just like, wow, this is really good.
Oh, yeah, But yeah, that's really it. I mean, people go into relationships sometimes hoping the other person's going to fix them and make things better. Well, the other person may not even be very unlikely to be equipped. If they're not a trained therapist or not a trained counselor, then they're not equipped to deal with those issues the other person has. So again, then the person who's expecting to get fixed, they start to get frustrated. And then they start pointing the finger, and then it just spirals downhill from there.
Yeah, that's really good. You have to be at least 80 to 90% whole yourself before you even start going into a relationship, because it's a spiral. That's so good. Yeah, you're not 50-50, you're 100 and 100. Don't give 50%, give 100%.
In an ideal world, but again, you were saying earlier about me being an advocate, but I look at things in terms of what Albert Einstein said. And Einstein said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it properly.
Ooh.
So I try, even though it's quite a heavy subject, relationships, because you're dealing with psychology, you're dealing with science, etc. But the bottom line is, if you can't get the concepts over in layman's terms, if you can't communicate the information, it's a waste of time. Even when I wrote my first book, I made sure that I didn't use any long words, because the book isn't about me impressing people with my vocabulary. It's about putting across information,
Right.
Useful information, hopefully.
Yeah, that's perfect. Now, you are an expert in the field of narcissism and abusive relationships. Narcissistics. I read somewhere, this was a while ago, I read somewhere that maybe it's people are starting to become more aware, or things are getting more diagnosed. I'm not sure, but the amount, like narcissistic personality traits, are higher. I don't know if they're higher than they've ever been. Maybe we're just noticing. What is you're an expert on narcissism, so what is your thought on that?
Well, narcissism has always been around, obviously. I should say there's such a thing as healthy narcissism. So there's nothing wrong with, wanting nice clothes or having good self-esteem, self-confidence, etc. It's when the narcissism is toxic or someone's diagnosed, which rarely happens, with narcissistic personality disorder. So back to your question, is it more common now? I don't think so necessarily. However, there is an argument that since the advent of the internet, there has been research that suggests that narcissism has increased since, we've got social media, people posting selfies, etc., seeking attention. So in some ways, it has become more talked about. What I've noticed is that a lot of people bandy around or throw around the word narcissist or narcissism. and they're not really, don't really know what they're talking about. Because someone might be arrogant, for example. They might have an arrogant attitude. They might be a bit of a control freak. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're a narcissist. Might give you a clue.
Right.
Might give you a clue, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a narcissist. Because to be officially diagnosed as a narcissist, as I said, there are 9 traits. So someone would have to score 5 or more of those 9 traits to be officially diagnosed as a narcissist. And narcissism is measured on a spectrum. So one of the questions I see quite often is, well, can the person be cured? Can the person be fixed? Can the person be changed? And my answer always is, well, depends where they are on the spectrum. They score 5 out of 5. Well, they're going to be officially diagnosed as a narcissist anyway. They score 6 out of 5. Well, the higher up the spectrum they go, the less likelihood of any meaningful change.
And have you ever seen any 10 on the spectrum, the 10 out of 10?
Well, 9 out of 9.
Oh, well, 9 out of 9, sorry, yeah, that's 9.
Well, I'm sure, well, not personally, but I know at the end of the day, that is the criteria. Wow. Now, the other problem you have is that a lot of people out there are walking around with undiagnosed personality disorders, and a narcissist is very unlikely to go for a diagnosis anyway, because they think they're super special people and there's nothing wrong with them. So therefore, why would they go to a therapist? The only reason a narcissist will go to a therapist is if they're suffering what they call a narcissistic collapse, because basically their whole world is a fiction. Because narcissism is basically about a mask. So they present a false persona to the world, hiding their true selves, because I know if someone was to see their true selves, the other person would run a mile. So at the end of the day, it's all about what they put out to the world, and also what they believe, because some of them actually do believe their own stories, actually believe their own lies. So if you've got someone who has not been diagnosed, but they have got some traits, and I mean, someone might have, out of the 9 traits, someone might score 4. So you could argue, well, they're possibly borderline. But in the final analysis, the more traits they score on that test, the more toxic narcissist they will be.
Well, one thing we didn't cover before I started talking about the narcissism is give us an explanation. What is a narcissist for people who may not really know what it actually means?
Right. Well, in layman's terms, a narcissist is a child operating in an adult body. And there is no definitive answer as to what causes a narcissist to become a narcissist. So some researchers will say nature, it's genetics. Some people say it's the environment, how they were brought up. Other people say it's due to some type of trauma during childhood. Because effectively, you're dealing with someone with emotional arrested development. The emotional arrested development happens between maybe 5 and 7 years old. But on an emotional level, that's where they're stuck. That doesn't mean to say they're not intelligent in terms of IQ. They can be quite high functioning, have great jobs. They often want great jobs because they are quite happy to use anybody to get where they want to go. But on an emotional level, you're dealing with an angry, irrational child in an adult body. That is really what it's all about, which is why they can have tantrums. Something they call narcissistic rage. Now, narcissistic rage is caused by what they call a narcissistic injury. Narcissists are well known to be very thin-skinned, very sensitive to any type of criticism, whether that criticism be valid or not valid, or even if it's a perceived criticism. That causes a narcissistic injury, which then leads to narcissistic rage. And really, narcissistic rage for me is just an adult having a toddler tantrum. But when you've got an adult who's raging, shouting, maybe even being violent, well, obviously that can be quite scary. And sometimes they can put on an act of being angry as a way to control the other person. You know, seeking to make the other person back down, basically.
Yeah. So they're pretty much oblivious and dismissive to other people's thoughts and feelings.
They are the center of their own world. They are known to be extremely selfish and also exploitative of other people. In fact, of the 9 traits, one of the main traits is extremely exploitative of other people, selfish. I mean, effectively, their relationships, whatever type of relationship it may be, are transactional. It's what they can get out of it, because they see people as objects. They don't see people as people. And because one of the other 9 traits is a lack of empathy. So if you tie together a lack of empathy with extreme selfishness and being quite willing to exploit other people, that's a very dangerous combination, let alone the other, 6 traits, if they've got those as well.
Yeah. Pretty self-absorbed. Very
much so. And you see, you have subtypes of behavior. So yeah, you've got the 9 traits, but I don't think off the top of my head that self-absorbed is one of the 9, but they're basically their subtype behaviors. So for example, being thin-skinned is not necessarily one of the 9 traits, or, but being exploitative, most definitely. And you can see it because when you read, or when I read, various accounts of people who've been involved with narcissists, the stories are all very similar because their behavior is very predictable. So it doesn't matter if they're an overt narcissist, a covert narcissist, or some people call it introverted narcissist, or whether they're somatic. So somatic means they obtain their attention and praise because of how they look, their body. Or they might be cerebral, so they gain attention by their intelligence, as it were. So they're all different. To me, there are different types of narcissists, and there's different types of behaviors they will exhibit. But again, as I said before, if they're doing their love bombing correctly to suck their target in, these things are not going to become evident until the person sadly is already involved, and then that's a whole other ball game.
The thing, most narcissists, I should say, it's quite difficult because they're very charming and charismatic for the most part, and so it's hard because you find yourself getting sucked into that because they have high self-confidence, even if it is a mask for their insecurities. They are believed to have high self-confidence. And their charisma and charm just suck you in. But part of narcissism, that's what they do, is they suck you in because they bring you in. So basically they can be the alpha, whether it be alpha male, alpha female. Does that sound about right?
Yes. Well, the thing with quite a few abusers are not just narcissists. You've got psychopaths, you've got sociopaths, etc. But the first thing to remember is that they're very good actors and actresses. That's 1. 2, they're very observant. 3, there's a tactic they often use, which is called mirroring. So what they will do, they meet somebody new and they mirror that person. They mirror their values, they mirror their beliefs, they're interested in what they're interested in, etc., etc. So this is going to sound a little bit strange. But someone who's been subjected to mirroring and then they fall in love, effectively they're falling in love with themselves, because all has happened is the narcissist is just mirroring that other person. So that they can morph. It's like being a shapeshifter. They can morph into whatever they think the other person wants. So, you like chili, they like chili. You like opera, they like opera. They like horror films. Oh, I like horror films too. I had a lady I was supporting a few months ago, and she was telling me a story where she would buy a book and be reading it, and then her husband would buy exactly the same book, and they would be sitting there in the living room, both reading the same book, you know, on the same page, discussing the book. But he was, again, a perfect example of mirroring. He was just mirroring her. Thankfully, she's left him now. So that's good for her. Yeah, so they've got different tactics on top of, obviously, the love bombing. But, you know, but going back to mirroring, it's like, you know, someone can believe, oh, I've met my soulmate. They're just like me. They like everything that I like.
Right.
We share the same values. We share the same beliefs. It's all just an act. It's all just to get the person suckered in, basically. Because as good actors and actresses they may be, no one can keep up an act forever. Eventually that mask is going to fall off. And when the mask falls off, that's when you see the true damaged person that you've been dealing with. Because they are damaged individuals. And people can argue, well, obviously, it's not good to judge someone with a mental illness. And I would never judge someone with a mental illness, but you have to understand that someone with a mental illness, often they're doing harm to themselves.
That's right.
When someone's got a mental illness and they're destroying other people's lives, that's a different ballgame.
Yeah. Do you find that narcissists, so, you know, they're charming, they're charismatic, they mirror, in my experience and my my knowledge on some narcissism, once that mask has been revealed, it's kind of like fading off, it's falling off. They become more controlling and abusive. Mm-hmm. Try and make you feel like you're small, you're less than. That's part of that control too. They mirror, they become your soulmate. They're just like, they're everything you've been looking for. And next thing you know, you find, wow, where did this happen? Where did I get controlled? Where am I now? I'm being told, you know, they put you down. Not all of them, but this is common traits of narcissists too. They prey on your emotional aspect and the intimacy of that relationship. You now are becoming less and less and less. And then that's when you're saying it's so hard to get out of later on. It's so hard to get out of that because now you're emotionally dependent on that. There's patterns. And you talk a lot about that.
Well, at the end of the day, as I said, they are very predictable and they have a very predictable relationship cycle. As I mentioned before, which is idealize, then devalue, and then discard. Yeah. Right. During the devaluation phase, that is when they are going to start finding fault with you. Often made up faults. They'll just start attacking your self-esteem, attacking your self-confidence. Suddenly you can't do anything right. And it's quite ironic. The things that they were probably attracted to at the beginning are the very thing they're going to start criticizing you for.
Right.
You know, and then part of that control issue is, I had a guest on, Marcia Hilton, and she was saying to me during the interview, when she met the narcissist, he loved her long hair. Then she got involved with him, and then a few months down the road, I don't really like your hair long. Why don't you cut it? But again, that was a control tactic. So during the devaluation stage is when you get the abuse. And also during the devaluation stage is when they're usually grooming another person to take their partner's place. So again, I often see stories where people are saying, how did they get involved with somebody else so quickly? How has she met somebody new or involved with somebody new? And it works for both genders. But what they don't understand is that grooming process, they're already grooming somebody else during the devaluation stage. A narcissist is not just going to leave generally and be single. They've got to have somebody. And that's why they're renowned for cheating. They're very well known for infidelity.
Wow.
So during the devaluation stage, they're already looking for somebody else or have already found somebody else and grooming. So when you get from devaluation to discard, when they get rid of the partner, they've already got somebody else.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's not a question of, oh, they found somebody new so quickly. They've already found that person. They've already groomed that person. I compare narcissists in relationships to pedophiles. Just how a pedophile will groom a child,
Yeah.
a narcissist will groom their next target or their next victim. Because it is a grooming process. When you look at the love bombing phase, the beginning, the honeymoon stage, the golden period, that is the grooming stage. That's when they're grooming, when they're giving you the love bombing, the mirroring, etc. Then you go to the devaluation stage. Then you go to the discard stage, when they basically leave you if you don't leave them first. And if you leave them first, that's a whole other ball game, because then you've caused a narcissistic injury. They're going to be very angry. Then they're going to try and obviously get you back, go through the Hoover stage. So even though it can be quite a complicated relationship scenario, but again, their actual patterns are predictable. And it's predictable because they have a particular relationship cycle.
Right. Wow. Wow, we could spend hours and hours
Indeed.
on narcissism. Like those 9 traits we could break down, and and maybe if you're willing, we can have another episode and break down some of this.
Oh, certainly. I mean the 9 traits are pretty straightforward at the end of the day. When you look online, you will find them. But I'll run them by you very quickly. Let me think. Arrogance and dominance, grandiosity, preoccupation with success and power. They believe they're unique and special. They have a very strong sense of entitlement. They require excessive admiration. As I mentioned before, they are very exploitative, envious of others, and assume others are envious of them. And as we spoke about earlier, a lack of empathy. So those are the main 9. But, I don't expect, people to walk around knowing all the 9. But as I said, it's quite easy. It's quite easy to find online. You just go on Google and put in narcissist 9 main traits. Very, very easy information to find. But that's just your starter for 10.
Yeah.
to coin the phrase, but at least that gives you a basis to say, well, okay. So if you're interacting with somebody who seems a little bit overly arrogant, or they're always envious of other people, or they're always attention seeking, because that's a big red flag. So going back to your question about, is there more narcissism now? So I mentioned social media. So in terms of narcissists, they are known to need what they call narcissistic supply. So narcissistic supply is basically attention. Doesn't matter if that attention is positive or negative. That narcissistic supply can include sex. It can include power. Anything that basically gives them the narcissistic supply. And with the internet, obviously, a narcissist can get lots of narcissistic supply, selfies galore, plus they can construct an online image of their choosing. Obviously, it's going to be an attractive image, obviously. And there has been research done that says that narcissists are more prone to post excessive selfies.
Instagram.
They're posting the selfies, obviously, to get the likes, get the adoration, get the attention, which I believe. But what I've also noticed, though, is that people who've recently escaped from an abusive relationship, they will also post a lot of selfies because they are seeking to get validation, often because they've been so distraught and their self-esteem has been so damaged during the abuse, being told they're not good enough, etc. When they escape, they're seeking that external validation to say, well, yeah, I am good enough. I am a nice person. I do look attractive.
Right.
So the selfie kind of approach or ideas. It's not a one size fits all. You know, I mean, I've seen suspected people I suspect to be narcissists, because I always get a clue online. Once I get a clue, I follow up. So I might say, I mean, in an interaction, someone's a little bit arrogant, or they're trying to emotionally bait me online. I think, let me go and have a look at their profile on Facebook quickly. And invariably, you know, I'll find their page consists of selfies. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me. I've seen some Facebook pages where a person was posting 6 or 7 selfies in a day. So for me, that's a big red flag.
That's excessive.
Just a bit.
Wow. Yeah, I'm hoping, Nigel, you know, for the sake of time, that we can have you back.
Oh, certainly.
I have so much to talk to you about, and we would have to have a mini series on Netflix or something, as much as I want. But we can't. So I hope you do come back and talk to us. But you speak all over the world, virtually and in person. You're on so many different platforms. Like, what you have to offer, people are seeking out. So I would like to know what's next, what's going on, so that people can get a hold of you. You're a life coach. Now that everything's virtual, you can coach people who are all over the world?
Well, that's kind of like the next step I am looking at. I mean, obviously with the advent of COVID, obviously a lot of things are done online, as we are doing now. So my plan really at the moment is get the second book published, keep going with my podcast, because that's a valuable platform in terms of raising awareness about abuse. I mean, at the moment, I think I've had about 12 different guests who have all been survivors of abusive relationships. So that's a good platform.
What's the name of your podcast, so we can tell the people the name of your podcast?
It's called Interesting Conversations with Interesting People. So it's available on YouTube, all the usual podcasting platforms, Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, Spreaker. But if someone wanted to find me, they just have to Google either my name, Nigel Beckles, Beckles being Beckles, or if they Google author Nigel Beckles, they'll find lots of information. I'm very easy to find online.
And I'll have it on the podcast and on the video podcast. I'll have all of that as well.
Okay, thank you.
If people want to find you. But yeah, you're busy. You've got your new book coming out, and it's How to Avoid Abusive Relationships, a Guide to Toxic Personalities. How to avoid abusive relationships. I just want to say that over and over so that we know that there is a way. So Nigel Beckles, How to Avoid Abusive Relationships, a Guide to Toxic Personalities, coming out this year. And while you're waiting for it to come out and be published, you can also go and find his book that is already out. You can go on, it's on Amazon.
Yep, correct.
How to Avoid Making the Big Relationship Mistakes, because we all make them. I've made, like you said at the beginning, you've made probably all of them. I think I do. Still making them. Ask my husband. So how to avoid making those big relationship mistakes. We can find that with author Nigel Beckles. So go find his work. It's honestly, it needs to be on all of our bookshelves that we can go and look through and just educate ourselves, better ourselves, become healthier people so that we can find healthier relationships. And I might add, we didn't touch on this, but healthy relationships, abusive relationships, they don't only have to be in a romantic setting.
Very true.
Abusive friendship relationships and whatever that is out there, you can take away from these books and put it into those situations that you're into. And I also want to remind people to go and get that DVD, or it's on Amazon Prime actually too. So Looking for Love, it's an award-winning documentary that Nigel participated in. He played himself. I know we're on time, but I just want to ask a quick question. How was it working for the director Oh my gosh,
Menelik Shabazz.
that took a second. Menelik Shabazz, I know. Yeah. How was it working for him?
Fantastic. And in fact,
He's an award-winning.
when he approached me initially, my first book hadn't even been published, but he knew of my work on the book because of the Facebook group I'd started. So when he approached me, the book wasn't out, but now we're firm friends.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
And he has organized events where he's asked me to facilitate workshops because I'm a workshop facilitator as well. So we're great friends now.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's all worked out well.
It's all worked out. Yes, you got the books, you've got the movie, you've got your platforms where you support people who are who are coming out of abusive. Your survivor provider services. So you also reach out to organizations, companies, and help them recognize, I suppose. Would that be proper? You help them recognize, give them information.
Yeah.
Maybe people within their organization who are struggling.
Oh, indeed, because sometimes there can be situations where you might be working with a colleague, for example. I've certainly been through that scenario where a lady frequently was coming to work with bruises. So it was pretty obvious, even if you were that advocate, that something's not right here.
Right.
So it's just knowing kind of like sometimes the indicators that someone might be going through an abusive situation, and then knowing how to support them. Really, and obviously the first thing is not to be judgmental,
right?
Basically, because contrary to popular belief, many people can get involved in abusive relationships. So when I hear people say, "Oh, that could never happen to me," I say, "Never say never."
That's right.
Because as you said about the frog story, and abusive relationships are very insidious. So the frog story is, if you drop a frog into a cold pot of water and heat it up.
Very slowly.
Yeah. One cooked frog.
And they don't even know that they're cooking.
Yeah. And that's the same as an abusive relationship. You don't really know you're in it until it's often too late.
Yeah.
And then you've got to figure out your exit strategy to get out of it.
Yeah. Well, Nigel Beckles, I'm so honored that you took your time. You are such a busy man. I think every day you have people knocking on your door, interview after interview, sometimes like 3-4 a day, I think. You have a lot going on, so that you took the time out for this. I'm so grateful. I'm so humbled by this. And how to avoid making the relationship mistakes, how to avoid abusive relationships, a guide to toxic personalities. People go out and get it. His podcast, interesting conversations with interesting people. He's just everywhere right now. I mean, you just Google the name and you're going to see him everywhere. So thank you. You've taught us a lot. I hope that you do, and I'm being serious, that we could do this again and talk about other things, talk about your book when it comes out this year. So thank you for taking the time, Nigel. I really appreciate this.
Oh, thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
So thank you, my listeners. As always, I appreciate you so much that you tune in each and every week. Don't forget, like, share, follow, tweet, phone someone, send a pigeon, whatever it might be. Just make sure you're telling everybody that they should be listening to This Is Your City. Stay safe and stay blessed.